This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Later in the hour, we'll discuss issues and possible solutions around city transportation that could help more St. Louis residents feel comfortable navigating the city. But first, 77 years, that's how long it's been since St. Louis had a citywide transportation plan. And just last week, city officials presented a first look at a guide that remedies that. Producer Emily Woodbury had the opportunity to speak with attendees of last Wednesday's Transportation and Mobility Plan feedback session at Tower Grove Park.
What brought you out here today?
I'm an avid biking fan. I commute from Creve Coeur to where I work at Anheuser-Busch, and I've really appreciated the Greenway, the River to Pear Greenway, and the bike lanes on Gravois and Broadway. And I would like to see more of that type of thing installed.
Basically trying to stay one step ahead of the people that's trying to put transportation in our neighborhood by train.
In our direct neighborhood, in the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood, we're really concerned about the Metrolink Green Line because it's a 5.6 mile light rail and it's $1.1 billion.
I'd like to see a lot more discussion of rapid transit bus system. It's a lot less expensive than the Green Line that's been proposed, and it's something that can move easily as need demands change, whereas a line that's built into the ground can't be changed, even though the ridership is projected to be incredibly low on that line.
What were your initial impressions about some of the presentations they have here?
I think it's a great framework for the city to use going forward. It's not going to design any streets in particular, but just giving the engineers the things they need to say, hey, these are the values we're looking for when we design streets.
Not much. You had a lot of concepts, but not a lot of plans. And I'm still waiting for them to fix and maintain the roads. It's like put a hold on fancy stuff until you fix and maintain the roads.
I think the fact that it's fairly visionary, that it's a cohesive plan that aims to bring, a lot of disparate groups together, groups for funding, groups that are the local groups that are interested in seeing how the, transportation network could be changed to benefit the communities as well as the state entities, which sometimes are at odds with what the city wants to do. So the fact that they had all of these things in mind and are putting together a comprehensive plan on how to approach those sort of issues, I thought was really great to see.
I just think respect when they do these comprehensive plans, not just talk about, we want community input and this, that, and other. Make sure you have adequate community input. You're going after the federal dollars, you're only required to have 3 public meetings, that's been done. But someone needs to just step out of the box, go a little further, and make sure you're talking to key people in the neighborhoods.
In general, do you feel safe on St. Louis roadways?
Right now, no. I mean, if I'm cycling, I always fear I've had multiple people honk at us with the kids in tow, right? Yell at us, you rev their engines by us. So generally, I think any sort of plan that gives credence to anybody but cars or people driving cars is going to benefit the safety of those pedestrians and cyclists.
We have children walking the streets. My friends are afraid to cross the street to go to a park because they've seen people hit in the crosswalk. So I have a lot of concerns about that. I know they're attempting to address that. I didn't see any specific steps. There were a lot of talks about plans and strategies. I didn't see a lot about specific actions.
We're seeing increasingly, running stop signs throughout our neighborhoods. We don't have any lights in the direct neighborhood, but we see it all the time, no matter if we're city, county, all of that. And so without those regulations, and we have our children riding bikes and playing on skateboards and everything, so we're very always concerned about safety.
That was Carla Alexander and Liz Sondhaus of Jeff Vanderloo, Jeremias Schust of Lindenwood Park, Damian Johnson of St. Louis, Will Gallagher of Dogtown, Miguel Alexander of Jeff Vanderloo, and Carr Schult of Creve Coeur. And joining me in studio to talk about that feedback session and the Transportation and Mobility Plan is Scott Ogilvie, Complete Streets Program Manager for the City of St. Louis. We also have Jackie Knight, Project Manager for the consultant team. Jackie and Scott, welcome to the program.
Hello, thanks for the invitation, Elaine.
Now,
thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Now, overall, those were a lot of perspectives, but overall, what does that say to you, Scott?
Well, I think, so a great introduction, by the way. I recognized many of those voices. And I think the kind of hopes and concerns that we heard expressed there, I think are pretty much in line with what we heard throughout the public engagement process for this project. With Jackie's team, we started this last year in 2024. We've had around 3,000 touch points with individual interactions with St. Louis residents. We've had over 50 engagement opportunities, in-person pop-ups, online surveys. And throughout that engagement, we developed kind of the top themes that are in the plan. And those themes are to prioritize safety, to prioritize connectivity, which means things like connected bike network and accessible sidewalks, and to prioritize maintenance and quality of projects. Mm-hmm. And I think we heard a little bit of all those themes in those comments.
Yeah. Now, Reddit user and Southwest Garden resident Pat Zaglich says that St. Louis needs quick build traffic calming pilot projects. They say these can be built quickly and cheaply without years of studies. If that doesn't work, rip it out. If it does, make it permanent. So this is a pretty common sentiment, this frustration about years of study without actionable movement. You've just mentioned that the Transportation Mobility Plan we're talking about, the introduction that's been rolled out to the public, started last year. And a couple of years ago, St. Louis lawyer and cyclist Sean Milford was on this show and said, it seems like St. Louis is a city that loves to study things. We're tired of the studies. We want a plan and we want action. How is it that this Transportation and Mobility Plan is either similar to or different from past studies detailing these concerns around roadways and then possible solutions?
Right. So the city of St. Louis has engaged in a lot of traffic studies that are often related to individual projects or corridors. This is it's a step back, and it's a more general look at what the most important things should be for the city of St. Louis, to provide guidance to elected officials and departmental leaders and people setting budgets in the future about how best to maintain and enhance the transportation network we have. St. Louis has been in a little bit of an unusual place in that we haven't had a citywide transportation plan, as you mentioned, for many decades. And this is a typical thing for cities to have. Mm-hmm. And so we are catching up. It's actually one of many significant planning initiatives that the city's been involved in or engaged with for the last few years. So the way that this is different is it is setting guidance for the whole city, not just individual corridors. And the guidance in the plan can then be embedded into project selection, project design, and what things are prioritized, and the practices and the policies the city has related to transportation.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, when you say that this is common, I mean, it is common then to go 77 years, like almost 8 decades without a comprehensive...
No, it's common to have a transportation plan. So we've been in an unusual place in not having a plan, that speaks to the whole city for so long.
Right. Jackie, do you have any insight into why we've gone so many years without a comprehensive plan?
I don't have any insight directly into maybe why the city hasn't prioritized a transportation plan, but I do think the TMP really is an opportunity to establish a comprehensive vision for transportation moving forward. that's one thing I would add to Scott's commentary about, having this transportation and mobility plan in place is for the first time in nearly 8 decades, we have a vision statement for how we should be making infrastructure decisions, how we should be prioritizing transportation projects. And then just to add on to that, in addition, some of the work that's outlined in the plan and the draft plan will be available later this summer, early fall, is we've designed a street design framework. And so it really gets to some of the specifics about how individual streets by street type should look moving forward to try to, get rid of those individual studies or corridor-based projects. It's more holistic, looking across the city, focusing on connectivity and safety.
Mm-hmm. And when you say street design framework, Jackie, what does that mean? Is there a picture that you can paint for us, maybe of a particular part of the city that illustrates what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I would love to use the example of parks because that was something that we heard in the intro, and St. Louis is fortunate enough to have so many wonderful parks, but they can be quite challenging to get to. Think about some of our best parks are bordered by big roads that do need to move a lot of traffic. And so what the street design framework does is that instead of really focusing on moving cars through a space, it takes into account the adjacent land uses and the community needs and who might be traveling to get to those places. And it really incorporates those elements into how the design of the roadway should be prioritized. So thinking more about people traveling to a place as opposed to just moving through a space on that roadway.
Mm-hmm. I think related to both, Redditor and Downtown West resident 62 Bricks says another area where city enforcement is completely lacking is sidewalk maintenance. Sidewalks are the responsibility of the property owner. They should be inspected and repairs ordered on a regular basis. Every walker in the city knows about sections that are nearly impassable or where the sidewalk is just gone. The street is sometimes the only way around. Jackie, can you speak more to pedestrian mobility aspects of the city's plan?
I think that is something in the TMP that does really change how we're thinking about street design. One thing that I really tried to focus on saying, and the team tried to focus on saying during these feedback sessions, is it's not just about designing streets, it's about designing streets and sidewalks. Specifically within those themes that Scott referenced, within the theme of safety, there's 4 associated goals. And one of those goals is focusing on better moving children around our city and people that have unique mobility needs, thinking about elderly people or people living with disabilities. And so it really is a focus on streets and sidewalks. In addition, another component of the TMP that we included was a policy and ordinance review. And we do make recommendations about approaching sidewalk maintenance and connectivity on a more holistic basis and not on a parcel by parcel or individual property owner basis.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that stood out in the introduction that has been released has to do with how piecemeal all of these efforts have been around improving transportation, mobility, safety. When it comes to kids specifically, because Scott, you've talked about that on this show before, why is this so important right now?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, for kids in the United States, motor vehicle crashes are each year usually the first or second leading cause of death for children. And so that's, an urgent concern. But the ability to navigate your neighborhood, to go to the park, to take your kid to school, very much depends on having an accessible sidewalk network, on having safe crossings of streets, on having traffic that's not moving too quickly. And within the city of St. Louis, one of our potentially competitive advantages is, relatively compact urban spaces. People can move about without having to use a car. And people want to see that. It's something we heard through public engagement. People really want to see that enhanced. And they have a sense that, the the quality of life would be improved if they could navigate the city with their children more safely.
Patrick Vandertwin. Oh, go ahead, Jackie. Sorry.
I do want to add one thing on that too. Is I think it's really important that we're focusing on people getting around and being able to participate in their community. And when we're designing spaces where people that, are under the age of 16 or don't have a driver's license can't really get out and participate in their community, it just has a lot of negative repercussions for those children as they grow up in St. Louis and feel connected to St. Louis and, even civically engaged.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of connectivity, Patrick Vandertwin writes in that the Tower Grove Connector is coming in at $18 million for 1.8 miles of trail. How long will it take to cover our city with this sort of safe infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians? Scott, is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, so the Tower Grove Connector, I think, is a really good example of a type of design approach that the city wouldn't probably have done even a decade ago, and it's about building a multi-use trail connecting into the expanding Brickland Greenway that Great Rivers Greenway is managing, and connecting parks throughout the city. In this case, Tower Grove Park, closer to Forest Park, and these roadway reconstruction projects, where we are rebuilding the entire right-of-way, are very expensive. And so that's why it is important to be operating in a planning framework where we are, because there's not unlimited funding. We can't do that type of project everywhere, unfortunately. And so we want to maximize the investment, I think particularly around safety and connectivity, and make sure when we can make these major significant investments, we're doing it in locations where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of safety enhancements, so St. Louis residents aren't being injured or killed while traveling, and connectivity enhancements, so people can safely and comfortably, navigate their city and have their quality of life enhanced.
Mm-hmm. How much were you all thinking about not just who lives here now, but who will be living here in the future? And my question about children kind of had something to do with that, and in consideration of what the population of St. Louis City is and what we're looking at in terms of future projections.
So I think the way I might respond to that is to say that there's a big network of transportation infrastructure in the city, and one purpose of the plan is to get everyone thinking about what it takes to maintain all of that infrastructure in a relatively consistent way across the city for the long term. We don't want to have locations in the city that feel like they're not being invested in or being left behind or missing out on improvements. And I think if we can enact over time some of the policy recommendations in the plan, we'll develop a city that's much more consistently maintained. And that type of maintenance and improvements, I think that will build confidence in people in staying in St. Louis and moving to St. Louis. And give people a sense that every part of the city is being looked out for, that every neighborhood is important and is getting attention.
Mm. And this is for each of you in the last minute or so. What is it that it will take in order for this plan, which is a guide, to actually materialize into changes that people can experience and see? Scott, I'll start with you.
So we haven't had this type of transportation plan in a long time. I think the city right now is in a period where we are recentering planning as the place to look for guidance for decision making in the city. And we're in a period where we're making lots of really significant transportation investments. And if this plan is embraced, I think it'll really keep the momentum going into the future, and we'll continue to see more transformational projects coming.
Mm-hmm. And Jackie, what do you think what's it going to take to see it materialize?
Well, I think one thing that it will take to materialize is the buy-in from city staff. And so I actually want to focus on how we included that in the planning process. But we held at least 5 different workshops with staff across multiple departments that have some sort of responsibility for projects in the public right-of-way, starting from the very beginning of the planning process, aligning goals, which you see reflected in the themes, to working through the safety component, the policy component, the street design component. So I think that was really helpful because city staff very early on hopefully feels like they were included in the process so that we really understood the challenges of project delivery and could think about that within the framework that we designed. And then, of course, there will be a formal adoption process going through the Planning Commission and also working with the Board of Public Service so that it's the guiding document moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Jackie Knight is an urban planner and the project manager for the City of St. Louis Transportation and Mobility Plan, and Scott Ogilvie is Complete Streets Program Manager for the City of St. Louis. Scott and Jackie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Thousands of people are injured or killed every year in St. Louis in traffic crashes. A recent survey by members of the city's Traffic and Mobility Plan team found that about half of St. Louis residents do not feel comfortable navigating the city using their preferred method of transportation. What will it take to reverse those stats? On that note, about how they feel about traffic and safety, we heard from Dylan in Tower Grove South, who described what it feels like to experience St. Louis streets as a cyclist.
Cycling in St. Louis is both a beautiful and terrifying reality, with a combination of aggressive and distracted riders and either crumbling or non-existent cycling infrastructure. Riding your bike is a gamble in this city. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up nearly every time I ride my bike. But I will continue to do it because I love riding my bike and I love this city. And I know that there are organizations working very hard to improve the infrastructure and pedestrian safety of the city. But the results could not come quicker because this is still a very dangerous place to be a cyclist, to be a walking pedestrian. And that's a really sad reality.
And that was Dylan in Tower Grove South talking both about problems and issues as well as potential solutions for making people feel and be safer navigating St. Louis's streets. We also want to hear from you. What have your experiences been with traffic safety and hazard? What are some of the solutions that you would like to see? Give us a call at 382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. Now, with us in studio, we have 2 guests who are here to talk about the findings about safety and people's feelings around them. And first, we have Sean Late, who's Vice President of CBB Transportation Engineers and Planners. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you.
We also have Emma Clues, who's Vice President of Communications and Outreach at Great Rivers Greenway. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we've heard a lot of voices throughout the course of the program so far. And I want to get first your thoughts or reactions to the city's transportation and mobility plan. Emma, you've had an opportunity to look at the introduction. What came to mind for you?
Yeah, I've just been able to look at it a little bit, and I'm, excited and hopeful that this will be able to help influence change in our city and our region. From Great Rivers Greenway perspective, we work regionally across 3 counties and 120 different towns. So this is one of many that we coordinate with. And seeing things in there that were a mix of both addressing infrastructure but also policy. This is one little example, but something that I thought was exciting to see in there was having more enforcement and accountability for companies that might be doing construction or utilities, making sure that they're leaving those places, as good or better than they found them. This is such a tiny part of that, but just thinking beyond just infrastructure, but also the day-to-day operations and maintenance of these places was great to see. It was refreshing to see something like that be written in.
Yeah. Sean, how about for you?
Yeah, I think this is a big step forward. So there's been a real cultural shift, I would say, in the transportation, engineering, planning community over the last 20 years. When I was a grad student, we talked about removing friction from the roadway. Friction were bicyclists and pedestrians and transit vehicles, right? And now what we figured out is that those people are people, and they're a very important part of our transportation system, and that's how people get around. So this is a really strong framework plan that really incorporates and embraces those other modes of transportation and figures out how we can have our streets designed in such a way that it works for everybody. And so it's a big deal.
Yeah. People have been sending lots of thoughts our way because the subject we're discussing has very personal relevance. And Gloria in St. Louis says that she does not feel safe driving on the road. She pointed to the steel plates in the street and that a bolt from one of those plates damaged her car. We also heard from Lesem Ramos, who says, close the gaps between lanes so people don't drive around the cars stopped at the lights, and fix the roads so people are not forced to swerve to miss potholes, and also more one-ways and more roundabouts. So lots of things that have to do with structure as well as just behavior that people tend to engage in. Alfredo in Tower Grove South identified 2 goals to reduce traffic violence: stopping red light runners and protected bike lanes. Sean, are those 2 things, light runners, protected lanes, behavior, structure, are they related?
Oh, very much so. When we design our streets, there's really 2 components to the driver behavior. So one is a cultural issue, and that's being respectful for other people. I was down in Jackson, Missouri last night, and they've got a campaign, Mr. Walker campaign, that Springfield, Missouri piloted. And it's really a campaign that says treat your other human beings with some respect, and people who are trying to cross the road, let them cross the road, right? But at the same time, the way we design our streets does impact people's behavior. We can do things so that you will have people that will try to pass traffic on the shoulder, but we can put in medians and different types of techniques that really eliminate that. So there's a lot that we can do with physical design, and that's what the Transportation Mobility Plan is really about, is how do we design our streets in such a way that really helps influence the behavior that we want to see that would make a road safer.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add an example from our side of the world on the Brick Lane Greenway on North Grand. This is really what we'll be seeing. So North Grand is quite overbuilt. It's larger than it needs to be for the people driving car traffic that's on it now. And it's one of the most dangerous streets in the country. From the 4 years that we studied, there were over 700 crashes with someone walking or biking, 335 injuries, 17 disabling injuries, and 7 fatalities just on one stretch of North Grand. So the Greenway will come in, and that will obviously provide a protected space where people can walk and run and bike, but also redoing the whole street. Instead of it being 7 lanes where you can swerve, to that person's comment, you can pass someone if they're not speeding the way that you want them to, that type of thing. Reimagining that street to work for everyone includes reducing the width of the lanes, includes reducing the lanes. It includes bump outs and crosswalks where you're far less distance to cross, especially if you're in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller. This is the busiest bus route of our whole region, the 70 Grand. Mm-hmm. And so reimagining that street to have spaces for everyone, but also have that infrastructure be tightened up for exactly those reasons the person was describing. It really is a both and, like, what can infrastructure do, and then also some of those policies and driver behavior as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, this transportation and mobility plan is specific to the city of St. Louis, but as a both and, we live in a region where people are moving back and forth literally and figuratively all the time. So in moving beyond the city, Sean, last year you compiled a report called the Regional Safety Action Plan, another plan, and that one had a goal of reducing fatal injuries by 50% by 2050. The plan aimed to make the region eligible for up to $8 million in federal road improvement grants. Where does that effort stand today, Sean?
Right. So last year, we worked with East West Gateway in developing a regional safety action plan. And what that did is it investigated all of the crashes, the fatal, the serious injuries in the St. Louis region over a period of years. It identified some of the most dangerous roads in the region to help the agencies be able to focus on fixing those. It identified a number of countermeasures and some policy issues. And one of so what it did is it enabled the region, the municipalities, local public agencies in the St. Louis region to apply for implementation funding. An example of that, the city of St. Louis just last month applied for $20 million to redo West Florissant Avenue. The same things that Emma was talking about on North Grand, the same types of issues, and to rebuild that street. So we're very excited with with that plan and these other plans that are happening, that we're putting a framework in place to be able to address these issues that have been in this region for a long time. And we're hopeful that it would be something if we could reduce fatal injuries in this region by 2050 over the next 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Has it taken some work to get people to see these traffic issues as regional?
Yep, absolutely. There's been a lot of work done by folks like GRG, by East West Gateway, by MoDOT, and there's a real coalition. It's a tight community here to really get our hands around the issues there and to think regionally and how can we address these issues and make things better.
We're going to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation about regional transportation with Emma Clues and Sean Light. Before the break, we were talking about the experiences people have had, how people move between and within sort of city and county. One of the things that we've heard from many of the folks who have who've either sent us emails or called us, responded to social media, it has to do with that connection. Redditor O2 Alien writes that they want a rapid transit system that can get folks around the region. They say the insane amount of traffic violence on our streets is largely, though not entirely, a function of the fact that 90% of the region exclusively drives to commute. Our primary transportation arteries are highways and not subways. Supplement the major highways with subways and some key boulevards with streetcars or frequent buses, and that number will drop from 90 to 65, and the deaths will go down with it. As long as a car is the only way for a family to live a middle-class life, we're going to keep seeing violence on our streets. We also heard, we also heard from a Redditor in Tower Grove South, a resident there, and a cyclist named Hefty Fishman, 668. And this person says, I think we should have more protected bike lanes. I know road cyclists aren't huge fans of them, but the vast majority of folks won't feel safe riding with traffic. I wish the city would do more B-level work for these lanes, put up Jersey barriers, zebras, etc. Now, I've read those two together because these are two very different suggestions. There's mass transit, and then there's also, very specifically, people who are cycling. As you hear, I'm sure that each of you have heard these kinds of suggestions in the past. What is it that rises to the top for you about what people maybe should be understanding about the way that what we have to work with now and how we use it? Emma?
I think one thing that comes to mind is just that these are a need to have, not just a nice to have. So the ability to give people choices and options for how they get around. For some, it is their choice and it might be their preferred method. For others, it might be what they have to do to be able to get to work or to school or to church or, get groceries, whatever they're doing. So, regardless of how you get around the region, really think about all the different people and all the different walks of life in our area and what they need every day to just be able to get by. I think these are sometimes seen as more recreational types of projects, and we really see them as both transportation and recreation. You can use them for fun, you can use them to explore, but many people use them for their very basic needs. And so we want to make sure that that infrastructure is there and that people have options and choices for how they move about, depending on their ability, depending on their privilege, depending on what they need and where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Sean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about choice. It's about giving people options. Most of us do drive, but not everybody has the ability to drive. They might be disabled. They might not have the financial resources to have a car. So to provide people choice is very important. We do transportation planning throughout the state of Missouri, and we hear this everywhere. I was just down in Cape Girardeau and Jackson the last couple of days, and we heard that was one of the number one things we heard down in those communities. So it's a really important thing to think about. And Emma brought up a great thing as far as think about what other people need to do. Several years ago, we had a tax incentive for Metro. And if you remember, John Nations loved that. And his slogan was, we have Metro, some of us use it, but we all need it. And once you understood that the people that are serving you at the store or at the Starbucks or whatever, maybe they had to get to work using Metro, that puts it in a different perspective, that the business owners were really asking for this because their workforce needed it. So we have to be respectful of each other as people and understand that we all get around different ways and just be able to appreciate that about each other.
Mm-hmm. We'd like you to join the conversation. Do you feel safe on St. Louis streets? What is it that would make you feel safer? Call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. There's something I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about, Emma, because I think there are many folks out there, when they think about greenways, they are thinking very specifically about recreation, not as conveyances, paths for people who are doing the day-to-day. In your conversations with people out in the community, what have they shared with you about the way the greenways function as something that is a day-to-day necessity?
Yes, this was especially apparent during the height of lockdown, during the COVID, the height of the COVID pandemic, that this became a need to have. So some of it is a need to have from a transportation perspective, right? There are folks who are using the greenways, but also our sidewalks or public transit or other, ways to get around to, again, get to work, to specifically commute or get to school. There are folks who might be very able cyclists that can use a bike lane and feel comfortable riding with traffic. But there are lots of other folks that even that is a bridge too far for their ability or, courage or what have you. And so people really use the greenways in a variety of ways. Some of that is that specific transportation, but it is also where you are probably going to teach a little one to ride a bicycle, or where you're going to, take someone in a wheelchair out for a walk or a stroll, or, be able to get some fresh air. So they might be recreation, and they might be exercise, they might be commuting, they might be, enjoying nature. They can serve all of those benefits, but many of them, for many folks, that is their need to have. That is something that is their way to connect to their community. It is their way to get around. And so we have heard that time and again, that those choices are critical, those options are critical for them to be able to make good choices for their lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Reddit user Default Midwest Man writes that wider lanes encourage fast driving. Narrow lanes force folks to slow down, but in this city, maybe not. So, Sean, there are people who have expressed doubt that narrow lanes are going to do something to alleviate or to stop aggressive driving and speeding. To what extent can road design stop traffic violence?
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. So we talked about the West Florissant example. So that's one that we spent a good time really pulling through that. One of the unique aspects of West Florissant is it's kind of a cut-through for I-70 traffic, people trying to avoid that commuter traffic. And the speeds on that road can be 70-plus miles an hour, which is crazy. And you've got people that need to cross the street to get to the bus stops on the east side that now have to cross what used to be a 6-lane arterial. So one of the things that I've observed over time is that if I take a 5-lane road and say I reduce it to a 3-lane road, and maybe I have bump outs, so the parked cars, so it makes it shorter for people to get across the street, so a curb that kind of goes out to that lane so that people cannot use that parking lane to pass. You can only go as fast as the person in front of you. That drastically slows vehicle speeds because now I don't have the option to pass. I'm going to be behind the person that's in front of me. So that's one example. So there's lots of ways that we know that are effective in calming the speeds down. And we just need to, it takes an in-depth study of these individual corridors to figure out what the right answer and solution is for each specific street.
Mm-hmm. We have Evie, who is calling from Edwardsville. Evie, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thanks. Hi. I was hoping to just comment that if we were even on separated pathways like the Riverfront Trail now that I used to love so much, I now have a lot of cars on there. I've had a car going 40 or 50 miles per hour towards me on the Riverfront Trail, and I'm all for more infrastructure to keep people safe, but if we continue to see this escalating lack of interest in enforcement, whether that's the red light violations or literally cars on trails. I've seen it also on other trails in the St. Louis area. We just are not making enough progress as the deaths continues to escalate.
Emma?
That is absolutely an ongoing challenge. So from just a quick bit of background, Great Rivers Greenway is the entity that the voters, created to be able to build this system of greenways, but we do not have those operational capacities. So we turn them over to those municipalities or a campus or a county to operate and maintain. So operation in terms of that law enforcement or that type of thing is really up to those municipalities. We do as much as we can to report these issues exactly like Evie is explaining to those partners for enforcement. We just don't have any powers of the enforcement. So just FYI, but please feel free to continue to tell us about them. On the Mississippi Greenway, on the riverfront in particular, is a true challenge because it is an industrial working riverfront industry. This is a levee road. This is a road that, it predated us even, but it became a trail in addition to still being an existing road where barge traffic is coming in, meeting up with trains and trucks. It is a very complicated spot to operate. And so it's something that we continue to work on with our partners to figure out what law enforcement might be available, as well as other, perhaps more of a Greenway Guides patrol system or things like that.
And we have plenty more to talk about. We will definitely pick this up again in the future. Emma Clues is Vice President of Communications and Outreach at Great Rivers Greenway, and Sean Late is Vice President at CBB Transportation Engineers and Planners. Sean and Emma, welcome. Thank you, that is, for joining us on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.